All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Tonight we have Brad Anderson, and Brad is hey, what's up, Les? Um, Brad is a defense attorney here in Utah, and I asked him to come in because I wanted to ask him his opinion on a few things, what he thinks about, starting off with the Chauvin trial, and kind of feel him out how he feels if he watched any of it, and how does he feel both attorneys did, and how does he feel about the situation where the state seems to bring a load of attorneys with them. They had what, seven?
Yeah, I think at one point there were, plus their paralegals, investigators, everybody else they had sitting there
Yeah.
with them.
So the state's got these endless pockets.
Right.
And the guy on defense, whether this guy's a cop or a suspected criminal of whatever sort, or whatever, they can only bring what pockets they have. And do you think, as a lawyer, you are a defense attorney, so that may cloud your judgment, but do you think in the state of law in the United States that may cause a disparaging situation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question that the defendant is always behind the eight ball.
Yeah,
Always.
and where the state has to prove he did something wrong, that seems like they get to just automatically bring more ability to prove it.
Yeah.
They were throwing 500 exhibits a day out at this guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much power they had behind them.
Yeah.
And trying to throw stuff out, late in the game.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a modern trial, it's becoming a battle of the experts. It's becoming, my expert went to Harvard and yours went to Yale or Princeton or Stanford or wherever else, and we're just going to put the
Or what
fanciest,
city they work in, or
right, and how much have they published, what books have they written. We're just going to try and put somebody on the stand that's going to be so impressive the jury will believe them.
is that becoming an argument to maybe professionalism or expertise, or just dazzling the jury?
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more it's just becoming dazzling the jury. Because let's face it, a psychologist or a doctor that went to Harvard is no more qualified than somebody that went to the University of Utah necessarily.
Yeah.
But, your average person off the street who's going to be sitting on a jury is going to be impressed that here's someone that went to Harvard, and, so they may pay more attention and believe that person more. And so it is becoming a problem. And I don't know, I guess it's hard to say. I wasn't practicing law 30 years ago. Maybe some of the problem was the same back then, but I've definitely seen it change just in the time I've been doing it, and seeing this kind of battle of the experts play out. In one case I had, which was a child abuse case, the state was bringing 4 doctors in to testify.
And the state can afford
And
that.
the state's paying for it. It's our tax dollars are paying for it.
Well,
to prosecute it,
the
right?
state raping us pays for
Yeah.
it. Where your client has to foot the bill for any.
Yeah, and in that particular case, actually, because it became so expensive, it turned into she was able to get appointed counsel essentially, and because of that, then the state had to pay for her experts as well.
So we got raped on both ends
On
for
both ends.
for two groups of doctors or whatever, just to
Yeah.
point fingers at each other.
Yeah. But the other side of that too, with the 7 attorneys and the investigators and all of that, can be used to a defendant's advantage sometimes because of the optics of that. I mean, there have definitely been decisions made, where I've been working with other attorneys where we decide we're only going to have one attorney sit at the table with the defendant, and that's it.
Just going to have a face.
Because then you've got 3 tables full of people over here and, one attorney and the defendant on this side. And it creates kind of an optical situation when you want to exploit that exact dynamic of
The underdog.
Look what's being
Right.
brought against this person. How can they possibly, have a fair trial here?
I've heard it claimed that, and I've been to court, divorce court, but I've been to court, and it's exciting. Watching it on TV, boring.
Boring.
Being in there, especially when you are on one of those two tables in front of the judge is very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, speaking of the TV, it's very interesting. So I'll have clients that come in and hire me. You know, they've just been literally been charged within a day or two. And, you know, they're asking me when their trial is going to be, you know, they're expecting to go to trial within a week or two. And it's like, if you're lucky, you'll see trial in a year or two.
Yeah, that speedy trial in the Constitution
Doesn't exist. I mean, it didn't really exist before COVID, and now
I think
COVID
what they
has
mean by
completely
a speedy
eradicated it.
trial is, you know, before your hair changes too much color.
Yeah.
Or we won't be, you know, you won't have one of your children standing you by proxy because you're 6 feet under to find out the legal ramifications. So what kind of law do you specialize in?
So I do criminal defense pretty much exclusively. There are a few civil things related to criminal defense that I'll do once in a while, forfeiture, protective order type stuff. But for the most part, it's criminal defense.
Okay. All right. And you come right out of the gate with a large case in Utah.
Yeah. My experience, I'd say, is probably a little unique, a little different. One of the first cases I was really involved with as an attorney was the former Attorney General of Utah, John Swallow.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and for months, your face was on the cover of every Deseret News, every Tribune. It was there.
yeah.
What was the result of that case?
It was an acquittal on all charges for John, which in some ways is interesting, right? Because we start a criminal process with the person being presumed innocent. So at the end of the day, all I did was make sure he stayed presumed innocent, right?
Yeah.
He left the courtroom the way he walked into the courtroom.
That's
my job.
You're a defensive verbal fencer.
Right.
If they toss something your way, you try to parry it.
Yep. Exactly.
And you don't have to stick it anywhere. You just want it to not stick.
Yeah.
And okay, so on to the Chauvin trial. I'll be honest with this. I am not anti-police, but I'm not a fan of the police, especially in the last year. They have, I think, a lot of them have forgotten their oaths that they took. And so, but I don't want to disparage them for that because it's a community, they get ingrained into it and everything else. So I understand that, but they have forgotten a lot of that. Now, granted, in Utah, not so much.
Yeah.
In some of the bigger cities, a lot, including there in Minnesota.
But you got to also remember, Jared, these guys are under severe stress when they're policing these communities, these really densely packed communities, these the drug-ridden communities.
Well, that and they always revert to their training. So I don't want to dig into do we think he's innocent or guilty. The jury already figured that out to their case. But what I kind of want to ask you is, you saw what Maxine Waters came out and did over the weekend. Do you think that will affect an appeal?
I mean, I definitely, it's going to form the basis of an appeal. I mean, there's no question about it.
Because it was an open threat.
It was.
Two jurors.
I mean, the hurdle will be is essentially his attorneys are going to have to show that the jurors heard that, right? Because if she says it and they never hear it or know about it, they can't really say it caused any problems.
Would
right?
they then go and question the jurors?
Yeah, I imagine they will be doing that.
And then you've got to hope that the jurors are
honest.
continually honest about.
But what about the specialists? They seemed like they were waffling back and forth on concepts and ideas that they probably should have a solid answer on. Because I guess I could understand it from their perspective. They want to walk out of there alive and without having their cities burned down. So, I mean, like for example, the fentanyl that was in his system was 11 micrograms per liter, and the lethal dose is the potentially lethal dose that you might not wake up from is 3. So they were having a hard time expressing that is a possibility that's how he died.
Yeah.
And they would go back and forth saying yes and no and contradict themselves. And it almost looked to me as if these people are scared for their lives to say the wrong thing.
I think that's why you saw a lot of the experts came in from next to the oceans,
Yeah, and I
New
mean,
York and L.A.
and honestly, that dynamic isn't necessarily uncommon. I mean, I've experienced it here in Utah.
We
On
brought
the
in
defense side.
We paid to bring in experts from.
Well, on the defense side, yeah, we have. I mean,
Yeah.
because especially, going back to the child abuse case in Utah, if you need a child doctor, they're going to come from one place, and that's Primary Children's.
Mm-hmm.
And if they step
Oh.
out of line with you
Yeah.
know, what their boss or something,
And in
another
the state of
colleague
Utah,
says, they may face repercussions. So we have to go out of the state to find somebody that's
Oh,
not
yeah.
under that same thumb. So, getting experts from outside your area, I don't think is necessarily uncommon. But I mean, we saw it. One of the defense experts had blood smeared on their house the day after they testified.
yeah, no,
So-
not just blood. They had a decapitated pig's
Yeah.
head thrown up there, and it was one of the prosecutors experts that backtracked, wasn't it? Or not backtracked, but contradicted themselves a few minutes after they had I think it was on I can't remember.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into a point where I'm going to second guess those situations. I think the law enforcement manual there is lacking. Like I told Dave on another show we did about this, law enforcement needs to be trained to respond and get hands off.
Yeah. And I'd like to mention a couple things about this. And one is, at the end of the day, we are currently seeing all this attention being paid to policing, as we should.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing to keep in mind is, even just here in Utah, kind of a microcosm, and even smaller than that, Salt Lake, is I sit in some of these initial appearance courts, meaning it's the first court appearance somebody has when they're charged with a crime. And it may be you're still in jail and you're seeing the judge about having an attorney appointed or getting bail. Or if you're out, it's your first appearance in front of the court. As I sit in these in Salt Lake County, in the Matheson Courthouse, they do these Monday through Friday. And there are between 100 and 200 people every single day that have a new charge. So when you think about the number of interactions that police are having with citizens every single day, the actual number of incidences is so small, it's almost unbelievable that there aren't more.
Oh yeah.
And so, yes, there are problems. No, I don't think even the police are going to deny that there are problems. But at the end of the day, when looked at in context of the number of times these officers are interacting with citizens, it's a pretty small number. And it's pretty remarkable that it's as small as it is when you consider how tough the job is.
Right.
Mhm.
What wasn't the number of black people killed by police officers 27 last year? Wasn't that the
Yeah,
I think it was 19 unarmed.
so?
But I don't want to pick it apart, because then you get into breaking down statistics.
Yeah.
and that's one, you both sides always try to use those statistics, but it would take a 4-hour show
It
to
would.
break into any of those statistics, be it regional, you've got the economy disparities, all that stuff. And I have, obviously my ideas I've spoke about before on here about how to cure some of these inner city issues, and all of them definitely include removing government incrementally, right off the bat, cut regulations and licensing laws on hairdressers and things, provide opportunity. There's no reason a guy who wants to be a handyman in Flint, Michigan should have to get a handyman's permit.
Yeah.
Let him go out. If he can find the work, let him go out and find it, and let word of mouth decide whether he survives that business or not.
Yeah, and I and kind of on that idea of the interactions with the police, I think the single best way to cut down on police interactions and thus police engagement and problems is to stop criminalizing everything.
Yep. Boom. Right there.
The police are a hammer, and we created that hammer, and we gave them the job they're supposed to do. And you can't blame them for doing it. They were told to do it. We told them to do it.
And they have to do it safely, which means you have to detain the person who might be on PCB drugs that turn you into a superhuman, and you don't want them to fall down and hurt themselves at the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Not just that, but we trained them. We took them and put them into post, where post training, not a significant amount, but an amount of post training, a percent is combat.
Right.
And we took him in there and we put him, and that's obvious. We want our law enforcement officers to be able to handle themselves under that situation. I'm a firm believer. Legalize it all.
Yeah.
All drugs, legalize them. Treat it like alcohol. Age limit, where you get it. I mean, I like what they've done in Portugal, where they turned all the money that was going into their interdiction, they turned it over to a medical field. So when you go get your heroin, it's measured by a nurse. It comes with a clean needle. There's someone there, and you do it in a safe place. And then you stumble out, and then you can have 2 other rooms tied to it. One's a rehab, and the other room's a job service.
But this wasn't even about drugs. It was about theft.
Well, yeah, I mean, but
It wasn't about theft. It was about a counterfeit $20 bill.
Used to steal cigarettes.
Well, yeah, but and
That's theft, Jerry.
when I watched it again, it looks like his dealer put him up to it, because his dealer apparently was in there right before that trying to use a counterfeit bill.
yeah.
And
And again, you know, the decriminalization of things isn't going to end this problem. No one's saying that. There's still things that are going to be illegal. You're still going to have police officers. But the most recent one with the female officer that mistook her pistol for a taser pulled that individual over because he had an air freshener on his mirror. Because in the state,
was that
it's against the law to have an air freshener on your mirror.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Yeah,
You
so
know? Now in the state of Utah, it's also illegal to have anything hanging from your mirror.
Yeah.
And that just to me, that looks like one of those novice laws that allow the police to interact with you.
Right. And I mean, that's the entire purpose. What we should call it is a DUI detection law. It's a reason for a cop to pull you over when you're doing nothing else wrong, so they can, because they think for whatever reason you're DUI or you might be a drug runner or whatever.
Or they're bored.
I mean, there are reasons I shouldn't admit this. I can drive over the speed limit and not really ever get pulled over, and you know, other people don't do anything wrong, get pulled over all the time. There's a very specific profile that's being looked for, and if you fit that profile, and I'm not saying it's necessarily race, it's the, you know, with
The
license
vehicle.
plate readers, it's where your vehicle has been.
Yeah.
Those officers can see.
Or do you have an
where you
old
need to be.
vehicle with brand new tires
Yep.
that's riding high on shocks?
Exactly.
Or riding low on shocks. They look for that. I was trained to look for that. If you see an old Cutlass and that thing's got brand new tires on it, watch it.
Yeah.
Because that means that thing come from Mexico or came from a distribution point.
And so that's what they're, you know, that's what they're doing. But it's this criminalization of everything, because the more chances you have to interact with an officer, the more chances are things are going to go wrong. It's that simple. I mean, you don't need to be a statistician or a mathematician to figure this out. The more,
Well, it's just like the guys who are at the bar asking every girl there on a date. He's going to get more dates than the guy that sits in the corner.
Yep. And so, you know, that would be one of my solutions to the problem right there is let's step back and, you know, what are we having these officers do and why?
Find out what laws really make it pertinent. And I would say we need to start with marijuana. Right
no
off
question.
the bat.
No question.
Oh, is that still illegal?
Yeah. I mean, that's,
Go
you know,
figure. It's got a time clock.
But and here's the other thing I want to bring up in this subject. So back when I was doing my undergraduate degree at the U, I worked with a professor on a research project. And what we wanted to look at is why, say, in Japan and Germany after the war, we were so successful at rebuilding those countries, putting them back together. And now, you know, they're in the G8, they're the most successful countries in the world. But in other places, Iraq, Afghanistan, and some of the other places we've gone into to try and build democracy, why hasn't it worked? Could we figure out some of the things that, you know, cause problems? Is it the amount of money spent? Is it the amount of time we spent? And it turns out what we came to a conclusion of is one of the most important things was how the public viewed the police force. That if in the country there was a legitimate law enforcement mechanism in place, chances of the country succeeding were extremely high. And it makes sense when you look around the world.
We went into Iraq. Their police force was known for abusing people on behalf of the dictator. Went into Afghanistan. Their police force was religious zealots.
But in Nazi Germany, they were known for walking grandmother across the road. And
Well, in Germany,
giving
they
candy
had
to kids.
so it would have taken. We should have focused if we wanted to. I mean, we shouldn't have gone over there anyway. We should have bombed them with blue jeans and porno mags. But if we wanted to, what we should have done was spent time building a police force reputation.
Exactly.
And same in Afghanistan.
And I mean, think about it too. There is some sense that's made by that when you think about how you interact with your government. I mean, as far as interacting with government outside of filing your tax return or having to deal with the IRS if you don't, who is it from the government you're going to interact with? It's the police. That's it.
The
That's
police and
like
the
end of it.
DMV.
And the DMV maybe. In which
And out here in Tooele, DMV's magic.
Right.
Best DMV on earth. Don't nobody come out.
Yeah, I was
here
going to say,
find out.
you don't want to tell people that,
Yeah.
Jared.
I'm telling you. Terrible fishing, terrible hunting. DMV sucks.
Now, another aspect I just want to interject on that is maybe the cousin marriage thing that's in the cultures. I know that might shave a few brain cells off on the exit of the womb, because a lot of those cultures over there, they specifically intermarry within the family.
That has been a problem with Pakistanis that have immigrated to Europe and Great Britain.
But you'll notice none of these
But-
countries you mentioned that are successful, they
well,
don't do that.
I think a lot of the issue is also they were stifled under the Ottoman Empire forever. A lot of
Well,
promises were made at the end of World War One. Promises broke, and then they got stifled underneath other elevated empires, and they never had a choice. They never had, they never had any kind of argument.
Yeah.
They
I mean, like anything else, it's an oversimplification of the problem. But I do think it does bear some merit when thinking about, the role that law enforcement plays in a society. And if you have a legitimate law enforcement mechanism, you're going to have a better society. I don't think that's too big of an insight, really, when you think about it. Look around the world, the countries that are successful and good have generally good law enforcement and a good legal system. Look at the places no one would want to live and everyone's fleeing. They have no legitimate law enforcement, no legitimate legal system.
Was Saudi Arabia on that list? Because they've got a very functional law system, and I mean, it's a country that's not really doing too bad over there in the Middle East. But I wouldn't say they're a pleasant society that I ever would want to exist in.
Right, and no, I mean, we didn't look at Saudi Arabia. We were looking specifically at countries where the U.S. had intervened
where we had gone,
militarily, and not just minorly.
No,
but
and
seriously
Korea kind of applies
Korea's
that.
in there,
Korea's
it
a
does.
different weird one, because Korea, right after we, I don't know, took stewardship, we never controlled it, except we did strip their military just in time for North Korea to come over, and I think we stripped it in 49 and they came over in 50. But Korea was a weird one. It was kind of a dictator. It was doing far worse than North Korea was.
Oh, yeah.
Until the Olympics. I think the Olympics is what changed it, when they saw potential, when all the other countries, the Western countries and the capitalist countries, quite frankly, came over and said, I'm not walking everywhere. I'm not riding a bus. And they brought cars with them. And then these MSRs that had donkeys and Humvees on it got to see the automobile in Korea exploded.
Yeah. Yeah, and now they make some of the best cars in the world, honestly.
And K-pop.
And they have one of the best. I mean, they have a really interesting. They've got a positive police system, a positive legal system,
Right.
and all that. And they may have had that before, but I mean, Sigmund Rhee was a dictator if there ever was one.
So I think it's something interesting to keep in mind as we talk about the police, as we criticize them, and rightly so. But at the end of the day, they are important.
Yeah.
And they play an important role in our society. And I personally wouldn't want to live in a society without them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what it's about is defining their role, what we want them to do, and, what should be illegal? What should we be allowed to do and not do?
I think that's a big thing. And I don't want to criticize police officers, especially not on the individual level, because making a split-second decision when hazard is on the line, personal hazard to
Right.
one of your coworkers and things like that. I want to criticize their training regimen, obviously. That subduing posture that he took with George Floyd was in their training regimen as he employed it.
And you know what? You also have to take in consideration what's going on around you as a police officer. So many bystanders attack the police officers that when you're in that situation, it is a combat zone. And I sympathize for Chauvin. I think he's the sacrificial lamb to Black Lives Matter now, and you know, people are cheering the fact that they're going to try to put this guy away for 40 years, and here he is, just trying to do his job. He had no intention of waking up and killing George Floyd that day. He had no intention of that. That's not his intention. It's the same thing as like whenever I lost a patient performing CPR. What are you going to do? Put me away for 40 years?
Well, the one they got, the second degree murder, is if you're committing a malicious or a malicious act that causes the death of someone, and they're judging that by him kneeling on the neck, he committed an act that was heinous and without regard.
He did try to go on the shoulder blade, though. You can see the video footage. He was on the shoulder blade. He tried. So, I mean, it's not like he didn't try.
That's why I think police need to be trained. Every cop needs to carry 3 sets of handcuffs on him. The minute you've got to gain someone control, you hog time and go hands off.
Yeah. And, you know, look, I don't think at the end of the day, any of us are ever going to know what was in that officer's head and what was going through.
Yeah. Or George Floyd's or the other 2 officers,
right?
Or the officer that was trying to do kind of crowd control.
At the end of the day, I mean, I think the biggest problem in that case is the 9.5 minutes. That, you know, after 6 minutes, you've got an unconscious person here. And
that's an issue.
And why do we have another 3.5 minutes where you've got your knee there? I mean, and I think that at the end of the day is the biggest problem with the case. And other than that, I don't really want to comment on more than that, because I just don't know much more than that. But I do think that's where the problem comes in. Now, the other interesting thing about it is I was watching a lot of the media coverage of it and kind of the protests and that. So many people were saying they wanted him to be convicted of all 3 charges, right? And I don't know Minnesota's law, so these comments do not go towards the law in Minnesota, but I can speak to Utah. If that had been in Utah and he had been convicted of all 3, he would be sentenced for the least severe crime. Because in Utah, if you are charged with crimes that are essentially lesser included of each other, so basically, you can't murder somebody and manslaughter that person. The difference being your intention. You can't intentionally kill somebody and unintentionally kill that same person. So
that's a good question.
So in Utah, if you were convicted of both the intentional and the unintentional, your rights would be, you would be sentenced for the unintentional. The
so
lesser
he would
of the
be
crimes.
sentenced. What was the 2nd degree manslaughter?
The 3rd degree, or whatever they called it.
3rd degree manslaughter, unintentional harm.
So that's what he would be sentenced for here in Utah, if that happened here in Utah. If a jury convicted him of all 3 of those charges, because all 3 of the charges are the exact same, essentially, conduct. Your only difference here is your intention. In Utah, you're entitled to that, to the lesser.
I understand why they throw 3 charges pertaining to the same thing at it. All 3 charges pertain to the death of George Floyd. Now, if, say, he was a drug dealer and he got charged with, drugs and selling drugs and killing someone, I can see 3 separate charges. Right. I would rather see them hone in on one and perfect that.
And so here in Utah, often what you'll see happen is if you have a situation, take an exact murder case, and my client was charged with murder. I may ask that the jury be instructed that if they don't believe he committed murder, but they think he caused the death, then they could convict him of manslaughter. But they would be instructed it's one or the other, or acquittal. You can convict on this, or you can acquit. You don't get to convict on both.
This one was kind of a big media deal,
It
though.
was.
I don't like that the media got involved. I think that muddied the waters regardless. I don't like that Maxine Waters got involved.
Yeah.
That muddied the waters. And also, I mean, let's face it. Congressman Waters is a horrible congresswoman. Horrible. She gets involved with this. She stirs a lot of violence. And I seem to remember we just had like a try to impeach over lesser things than what she has said, what, 3 times now?
Yeah, well, and I think the judge, kind of got it right when what he said is, look, we've got 3 separate and equal branches of government. You guys stay out of ours.
Yeah,
Let
leave mine
us
alone.
do our job.
And they need to figure out how to get the fourth estate out of that
Yeah.
part of it,
well, and
especially on a televised one. We don't need a talking head to tell us what went on in court. If we're interested, we can watch Cliff Notes or we can watch the whole thing.
yeah. Well, and I mean, I think if any case deserves to have a jury sequestered, and by that I mean during the pendency of the trial, they go to a hotel where they stay with just the jury. There are no TVs, there are no newspapers, and in this day and age, no computers, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll
And-
drop them off a pack of DVDs.
Right. And they stay there until the end of the trial. If ever there was a trial that would justify that, this is that trial. Without question. I mean, there's
It
no
is.
question. This is
The
that
judge,
trial.
I think, dropped the ball on
Yeah.
that, and I think the judge recognizes that now by his statements he made at the closing arguments.
So, and I'm not saying that would have changed the outcome, but at the end of the day, I think it would have everybody, not just involved, but everybody in the country, believing the verdict was more fair.
How many of those jurors are scared?
Right.
I'm sure all of them are.
What about the families? George Floyd's family got a press advisor or something that was in there trying to take pictures of the jury.
Yeah.
And she got in trouble. Now, she should have been held in contempt. They should have made a big point of that, but they didn't. But anyway, so we beat that one to death. Whatever happens there happens. I don't think that, personal opinion, I don't think Chauvin meant to kill him, but I think Chauvin made a lot of mistakes in that. And one of the mistakes, sadly, is following his training. He should have thought outside of his training.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he should get 40 years for it. I hope he doesn't. I sympathize for his family.
I think his family left him, at which he suffered.
That's how scary
Anyways.
it is.
Well, I want to move on to Nadler, Hero Nadler, coming out and talking about increasing the Supreme Court to the number of 13. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, what that is a third chamber of Congress, because it'll be 13 this time, and the minute power switches hands, it will be 17, and then it will be 4 more and 4 more and 4
It
more.
will it'll take away independence.
Yeah,
of the
it won't be
judiciary.
you won't have. It's not a Supreme Court at that point. It's just
Yeah.
simply another legislative body, and that that's what it is. That is what that proposal is. It is an end to the
Yep.
Supreme Court and a third branch of Congress.
When you were in
Third
law
chamber.
school, did they ever teach you about during the Civil War and right after when Grant was president?
During Reconstruction.
Yeah, how the Supreme Court went from dropped down to 5, which was the original number, jumped up to I think 16 or 17, then dropped down, and kept jumping depending on. I mean, Grant, without argument, is the most corrupt president we've ever had. That's where the word lobbyist comes from, Grant, because he would hang out at that big hotel in D.C. in the lobby, and that's where people would come and buy favors from him. But it happened under Lincoln as well. Lincoln adjusted the numbers so that he could have war. So, and it did a lot of damage, I think, to the Supreme Court for a long time after, for about a generation and a half. They had no relevance. I mean, people didn't care. They avoided them. So I hope Nadler thinks about that. I mean, let's look at it realistically. If he was to do it, it would be to push through constitutional adjusting dictates.
Yes, I mean, without question.
It's extremely for the Second Amendment, probably the first. Let's face it, Biden already killed the Fourth and the Fifth. I mean, killed it. The third, I don't think the government cares about because they'll build a hotel with your money anyway.
Yeah, they don't need to. They don't need to put troops in your house.
They don't need to because they've already stolen everything. They own your house anyway. They can just.
Which, by the way, if anyone listening has a case where I could argue the Third Amendment is being violated, I will take it for free because I've always wanted to be able to do that.
Oh,
I don't
I
think
love
I've ever seen a case where the Third Amendment gets
I might
invoked.
egg them on. But anyway, so yeah, that's a tough thing. But you know, and what you said, that's my thoughts too. It'll destroy it, not just that, but I think it'll destroy the respect for the government completely.
Yeah, I mean, part of the power of the Supreme Court in our system is that they do have legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
That even on extremely divisive issues, gay marriage, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's a divisive issue, and there'll be some who never accept it. I understand that, but at the same time, we all accept that that is the law now.
Yep.
Even if you disagree, you accept that that's the law.
See, I'd have gone a step further. I'd have got government out of marriage.
Well, yeah, no,
I'd have said
agree.
it. You deal with it with a, you know, if you want an atheist minister, a Mormon minister, a Catholic, you know, deal with it on that level.
Yeah. But what we all agree on is that the court has ruled on it, and that's how we proceed forward. And that's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing to have an institution like that that can resolve kind of
It is.
unresolvable
It was
questions.
just like that,
And
it
the
was,
people respect the decision,
Yes.
whether or not they
yeah,
agree with
whether
it.
they like it
They
or not.
understand
No
this is the
one's,
way it's going to be, and we accept that.
no one's fighting it.
And I think the court, in quotation marks, going all the way back to the very beginning, if you look at Chief Justice Marshall with Marbury versus Madison, which was essentially the first case that the court took that essentially established they had this power to determine if a law was constitutional or not.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that case kind of came out the way it did is that Marshall, the Chief Justice, knew if he ruled against Jefferson, the president at the time, Jefferson would utterly ignore the opinion. And
Yeah.
the court would be nothing. The court would literally cease to exist because, as was said at the time, Jefferson has an army and the Supreme Court does not.
Yeah.
And so from the very beginning, the court has kind of understood that role.
Now,
and,
one of the
and
big
the limitations.
fights they had was with Jackson,
Yeah.
you know, and that was one the Supreme Court lost.
Yes.
He totally blew him off. Now, he didn't implement his blowing off. That was for, you know, presidents that followed him. But yeah.
So and that's, you know, that is the risk too, is they get their way, you know, they get their way, they put 4 more justices on the court to get the opinions they want. Well, great, but what happens when everyone just starts ignoring the opinions?
Yeah.
Right.
Or the next president comes in and says, okay, we're going to up it, or we're going to get rid of some,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, exactly.
and that could be another thing. So that just causes further disruption civilly.
Yeah. And so it's a silly solution to a short-term problem. I mean,
yeah.
the court, well, currently they don't like the makeup because they believe it swings more conservative than they would like.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to change. It's going to.
It's changed back
And that's
forth.
what I think both sides need to understand, is that it's the reason the Patriot Act wasn't a good idea under Bush,
Mm-hmm.
because then came Obama and Biden, and now they have the power. And on the left side, the power you want to give the government isn't a good idea because then Trump gets elected and
Or
then he has that power.
The filibuster back and forth the Democrats
Exactly.
have done.
Yep. And so taking the filibuster away sounds like a great idea right now for the Democrats.
Well,
but, you know, what happens when you're out of power? And it's
They
not
took
such
it
a great
away,
idea?
and then when they wanted it, they took it back, and then they took it away again. 2 Supreme Court justices got in partly, you could argue, because they had taken it away again.
Yeah. So to me, adding more justices to the Supreme Court is the exact same decision as just abolishing it.
Mhm.
It's going to have the exact same effect.
Makes sense.
It's an end to the institution.
The ideal way to deal with it is to hire intelligent and charismatic attorneys and get them to convince them.
Right. Right.
You know,
Or
to word your laws in a manner that they make logical sense.
yeah, and I mean, I think another interesting solution, and it would require a constitutional amendment, there's no question, would be term limits on the court.
Yeah,
And do away with the lifetime tenure so there's a greater turnover.
I don't think there should be anyone dying in the court.
Yeah.
Honestly, don't. I mean, RGB, you know,
Well, and that, look, a lot of the blame the Democrats have about the current makeup of the court should be laid at her feet.
imagine
the
if she
Obama
would've-
administration very clearly asked her to move aside so they could appoint someone younger. If she had done that, her seat would currently be occupied by whoever Obama had nominated.
Yep, and then it would be, you know,
Yeah. and
5 to 4 the other direction.
Exactly. So you know, the question is, do we want a Supreme Court or not? And do we believe in the institution? And if we do, it needs to stay the way it's worked for the last 2, 3, 4 generations.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Okay. Now the big question, and then we're going to go through the comments, but the big question I've got is, how do you feel about our institution, our justice institution right now? We see a lot of talk where, what's that lady's name that does the talk show? She said, we got the video. We don't need a trial.
Yeah. Yeah. Chelsea Handler.
Chelsea Handler. And that concerns me.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I believe in due process. I believe completely in due process. I think the state should have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed that crime. And I also believe in, I like due process. I like innocence before the eyes of the law. I like all those things. And that concerns me, because you start getting into really tepid waters government wise if you do away with those. And I think, the founding fathers or whoever were really ingenious when they wrote those in. And you could probably argue the Magna Carta was ingenious when that was written in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, in my opinion, and this is where I warned Grandma Jane, if she was listening, she might have to be careful, because I might get quite worked up here and
Okay.
say some words that
Grandma's not going to listen because she doesn't have a computer.
Fire away.
Look, our current due process in the system, and speaking, specifically towards Utah, because that's where I practice and it's what I know, but even beyond that into the federal system, is as thin as it's been since Lincoln suspended habeas corpus.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost gone. I mean, the rights that are being removed from people, a criminal defendant specifically, it's almost mind-blowing when I consider how short of a time I've really been doing this and the changes that have been precipitated in that amount of time. For example, on Thursday, I will be doing a preliminary hearing, which here in Utah, a preliminary hearing, if you're charged with a Class A misdemeanor or a felony, you get a preliminary hearing where the state has to prove to a judge that there's at least probable cause that you committed the crime they're claiming you committed before you have to go to a jury trial. And even just a couple of years ago, the hearing I'm going to do on a murder case on Thursday would have been a 2 or 3 day hearing with many witnesses put on by the state and my ability to cross-examine those witnesses. The judges told me we may have 2 hours on Thursday.
For a murder trial.
And my client will not be transported from the jail. So I will not be in the same room as my client while the hearing happens.
So you can't even lean over and say,
can't even talk to him. Can't even say, is that true? Is what the witness is saying
or,
true?
or
because I wasn't there. I don't know.
Can you clarify some of this for me? The brick was red.
Right. Exactly. He will be in the jail watching on a video monitor, and I will be at my office.
Oh, that
set up
destroys
very much like this. If this 19-year-old,
and they don't give you you can't set up like a private video link with him.
No. So it's possible I may be able to reach him on the telephone at the jail to talk.
Mm-hmm. Possible.
But am I really going to?
Well, and this is another thing I don't like. I don't like that we're jailing someone for anything short of blood on the hands murder for trials. I think they should be, out and free. If you have to, take something of theirs on lien or figure out how to keep them in the place, put a monitor on them. Ankle monitors are a lot cheaper. Hell, the guy pays for his own ankle monitor.
Yeah.
But I don't think they should ever be sequestered in jail, because if they are found innocent, that time of the abuse in the jail and whatever, that's a scar that unduly got put onto an innocent person.
And with the backup in cases we're having, I mean, even before COVID, I have a case from 2017 that still hasn't gone to trial. 2017. Now that person's out of custody, so it's a little bit different, but still 2017, this person.
What's your longest in custody prior to trial?
Probably 18 months,
Jesus
maybe a little bit longer.
Actually, that's a lot better than I thought it would be.
A year and a half.
I'm sure
though.
there are there's stories from other attorneys that have even longer.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I mean, look, it's, it's a problem, but I think what COVID did is accelerate a lot of changes that people were wanting to make anyway, and gave them an excuse to make the changes.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily the legislature here in Utah has changed the bail requirements that they imposed last year, which were sold to the public as a way to make bail more fair for poor people, right? Because rich people could do anything and get bail and be out pending trial, and a poor person was held in custody because they couldn't pay a bondsman even $100, right? So this was going to be designed that it would be on a need to, your ability to pay would determine your bail level. So, a poor person may only have to pay $100 to get out.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, if you're poor, you can't even afford $100.
Yeah.
So you're still going to be held.
I mean, when they've got bail set for anything less than murder, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. And
rich people, I can see taking bail because they have the ability to flee.
right.
I think maybe one thing to look at, do they have a passport?
Yeah.
If they don't have a passport, we don't even look at bail.
Yeah.
We look at, okay, ankle monitor, this is going to cost you $35 a month. Make fake ones. I don't care. Just pretend to them that you know where they're at.
Yeah. But then the other problem was, because I think everybody kind of recognizes there are probably some people that are dangerous enough that they probably should be held in custody.
I agree.
They shouldn't get bail. So that was then also a provision. It was the ability to pay, or the state could just hold you without bail.
Okay, we'll
So
just go
what do you think the state started doing?
holding everyone without
They started
bail.
claiming everybody was so dangerous they can't be let
Yeah.
out on any amount of bail.
This grandma who, slipped a crosswalk.
It's similar to the same law where, like, if you get caught peeing on the side of the road, you're now a child pedophiler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now everybody's just held without bail. We have Class A misdemeanors being held without bail.
And what falls under Class A misdemeanor?
I mean, almost anything anymore. I mean, the problem is the way the laws are written. Anything can be a felony. Anything can be a
Well,
Class
that's
A
another thing.
misdemeanor.
And another big thing I think to correct the system is we need to make it, you serve your time, the felony drops off, goes away. You get
Yes.
all your rights back.
Absolutely.
Now in Utah, we let felons vote, but you get all your rights
Yeah.
back.
And Montana does that. That's exactly Montana's law, is once you have completed whatever sentence it is, you're off probation, it's automatic.
Your life's
felony is
reset.
gone.
Now, maybe
all
if
your
you
rights
get
are restored.
if you get 3 of them in a span of 10 years, maybe we got to look at you.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think the other thing we need to look at is that felonies should be reserved for people that are going to prison. And if you're not going to prison, you shouldn't be a felon.
I think felonies should be reserved for violence.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
And it's got to be a level of violence. I think, make it a monetary cost to the victim. If they've got to go to the hospital and their bill reaches over, $2,000, that's a felony.
And so, it's all being compounded. And then you look at the fact that we can't really do jury trials. We've started to do a few here in the state.
How do they do them under the
So
corona?
I actually just attempted to do one. Unfortunately, COVID ended up ending it. But so the first day,
Do they call the jury in on Zoom?
yep.
The
so
guy's driving in his car talking to you on the phone.
So the first day for jury selection, the jury all is on Zoom. There's a monitor, very much like we have here, and you can kind of see them all, kind of hear them all.
And
They're in their houses, they're falling asleep, they're getting up, walking away while the judge is talking to them. If I had a client who was in custody and this was the only remedy, yeah, I would do it if I had to. Now in our trial, that was the first day. And then the second day we were supposed to actually start the trial, but the state's key and only witness came down with COVID symptoms and we couldn't do the trial. So, that's how they're doing it. So the second day, the members of the jury would be in the courtroom. And you would actually have the trial, although apparently everybody has to wear masks, even though everybody is COVID tested and tested negative. But then afterwards, everyone still must stay 6 feet apart and wear a mask, even though nobody has COVID. So,
yeah.
And that being a small example,
I had COVID. I officially had it. Had it last October.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I painted my house. I
So-
had body aches for about 6 hours. And then I was bored because they wouldn't let me go back to work for 10 days.
And so at the end of the day, I think COVID is being used as a convenient excuse by some who want to see a change to the justice system, that want to see, the rights of defendants whittled down and taken away.
And that concerns me. I mean,
It should.
Let's look at the inner city problems from my point of view stem from a culture that has been stripped of fathers, a culture that has been stripped of opportunity. And it's not, it has nothing to do with race. I think it has to do with location.
Yeah.
Because same with the Appalachians, where they're not stripped of fathers, but they're stripped of opportunity. And those are two big things in a young life, male or female. And I think if we can figure out how to, let's make marijuana. You want to keep it illegal? Fine. Drop off $100 fine if you catch someone with it. Don't even take it from them. Just give them $100 fine and tell them to get in their house to do it.
Yeah. Or some community service.
Oh, hey, I'd love community service. Yeah. You know what? Hey, you got caught with this. I'm writing you a fine. You got to clean up this gutter. I'll be by tomorrow.
Yeah, and you don't think they could abuse that though, Jared?
Well, what's the harm if they abuse that? Gutters are all cleaned.
Well, you might be cleaning a lot of gutters. Very, very frequently.
Well, let's put a limit. They can only assign them, one road 100 meters long. Whatever. I just think that
the government's even grown more powerful on the show right now.
I know the drug law has gotten out of hand.
Yeah, it's all gotten out of hand. Everything has gotten out of hand in this country, and the real question I think that needs to be answered, and this is kind of beyond the legal system or anything like that, is what relationship do we want to have with our government?
Mm-hmm.
What do we want to be a free people that gets to choose what we do if it has no effect on anybody else? Or do we want to be micromanaged to death and told exactly what we have to do and how we have to do it and when we have to do it? Because that's the way we're headed. And by the way, should you step out of line, you don't get to appear personally at your court appearance. You don't really get to defend yourself. And you're going to sit in jail while we determine if you've actually done anything or not.
Plexiglass is not that expensive.
So
we can figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look.
And if we're not charging that many people, we can give an actual court day to the people who need it.
Yeah.
To the victims as well.
Well, and part of the problem too is collateral consequences, right? Like oftentimes I can work out deals for clients that aren't going to require them to go to jail, aren't going to require them to go to prison. They're going to do some kind of treatment program, but they're going to be tagged with a felony.
Yeah.
You can't get a job.
You can't get a job. Yeah. There are certain places look, it's hard enough to find an apartment or a place to live currently if you're an upstanding citizen with lots of money. If you're a felon, it may be
what does that
impossible.
do for their economic opportunities?
Right. And if you live on the street, that's a crime too, isn't it? I mean, you have to have a place to live.
They've kind of backed off on taking homeless in because that just becomes that's a no-win situation.
Yeah.
That becomes and we have some homeless advocates in here, and that's a tough nut to crack as well. I think the lady out here that's running the homeless situation in Tooele is doing an excellent job.
Very dedicated
person. And I think and she kind of works through the government. And the lady we have on that's working in Salt Lake is doing an excellent job. She works there on a private system. And I think it'd be a good test to see which works better, a private charity model or a government model. And the government model has more resources, but the private charity model kind of gives more liberty to the homeless population.
Yeah, and look, kind of like some of the other things we've talked about, you could spend 4+ hours just on that subject alone and never get to the bottom of it. But I do think, just speaking on that subject a little bit, one of the problems with the homeless condition in the country is that in a lot of ways we're turning these people into commodities because there are certain people that have found out it can be very lucrative to get your hands on the government money that goes to help these homeless people.
LA is paying the steep toll.
Yeah. And so, like I said, you've essentially turned homeless people into a commodity. and it's a problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, we beat a lot of horses to death. Is there anything you want to cover before we go to comments?
One last thing, and that would be this to anyone listening. At the end of the day, no matter, what the government may do, the genius of the founders is the jury system.
Mm-hmm.
And you will never be told this if you serve on a jury, because the government has told us we can't tell you, but I can tell you here. You are the last line. You are the final check. The government can pass any law they want. They can outlaw you smoking marijuana, owning a firearm, whatever you want.
James Madison's.
But you on a jury get to decide if that law is just and valid. Doesn't matter if the person violated it or not.
I believe James Madison wrote a whole book on jury nullification.
That is right. You can decide. You get to be the check on the government and say, this isn't right. We're not going to convict.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing that can be done about that.
But you just said we're not doing jury trials anymore, right?
Well,
Hopefully they come back.
Hopefully we'll be.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Have we
will
turned
see.
into that police?
I may
state?
be out of a job. I don't know. But hopefully we're going to start doing actual jury trials again.
It's like studying law in North Korea, right?
Yeah, exactly. So long as the jury system exists, at the end of the day, if you're on that jury, you get to be the ultimate decision.
You got to go home to your prosecutor after saying that.
That's right.
Oh boy.
So
So next time we have you on, maybe a black eye, or she'll have you muzzled.
Yeah.
They see you walk in with a dog collar on. You get out of line. See you sit
So-
up tight.
but that's what I would encourage everyone to think about.
Yeah, look into jury nullification. Seriously, look into what Madison wrote about it. It's really impressive, and I mean, Madison is one of the greatest minds to definitely come out of this continent, but to exist.
No, wasn't that how one of the Bundys got off? Was jury nullification?
No, I think they found him not guilty.
Yeah, I mean,
Once
Wh-
they
why they did
presented
that, I don't
that the state, or not the state, but the feds kept just upping the ante over and over, it pissed the jury off.
Yeah.
And the jury said, we find him not guilty.
Yep.
But jury nullification completely makes all the argument gone.
so
Yeah, that's something to look. All right, let's run through these comments real
There
quick.
are a couple.
So we got Les. What's up, guys? Les, how you doing? All right. Jim says, do you think the verdict has anything to do with the way people's reactions would have been?
You mean like burning down cities?
I believe, yeah, he's talking about the riots, and we'll have to, it remains to be seen if the riots still happen. I believe once you gather that many people, I don't care if it's after a football game, there tends to be issues. So
They're looking for a party.
let's hope not. Let's hope that they wasted their money bringing in the National Guard and law enforcement agencies from other states. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm tired. Last year it was what, $2 billion worth of damage just in peaceful protests.
So,
All right.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with those jury members, when they go back into that room to deliberate, they are thinking about what's their family going to think of them,
Their family.
their friends,
Yeah.
everything else. What is going to be thought of them if they vote one way or the other? Guilty
One of
or not
the
guilty.
jurors lived in the town where the lady shot that kid.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't call him a kid. He's 22, but shot that young man.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any way around that in any trial that's gonna play. In
Yeah,
this
but this
trial,
one had-
obviously,
And
it's elevated.
and
obviously.
our system's designed to have cultural feeling involved with it.
Yeah.
That's why we have a jury.
Yep.
The fact that you said they're trying to take pictures of the jurors so that they can make mugshots out of them for these BLM
We
and
don't
Antifa
know if they
members.
were trying to do that. She
Oh,
was just
yeah,
caught
okay.
taking pictures.
Come on,
Now,
Jared.
this one's specifically for you, Brad.
Oh, hi, Amy.
Yeah. All right. Do you think? Okay, she's responding to his. She says no.
No, there couldn't be any possible. influence there.
It was murdered.
Sure.
Okay. Couldn't agree with you more. Okay, in front of children, God, and everybody, he took his body cam off, threw it under the squad car, and murdered him just because he was irritated by the onlookers and because he was breaking the new guys and he had a Napoleon complex. I don't know. I can't make
Because
that joke.
onlookers in the city that are angry and sometimes
don't-
attack you are never a problem
I
for
don't
police
think
force.
he took the body cam off. I believe it was knocked off, but I would have to double check. And I don't know what was in his mind. Well, I don't know what was in any of their minds. So I'm not going to.
We have a little powwow going back and forth there.
He had an extreme. Okay, so it sounds like we got people arguing about that. We'll try to move on. Very well said, Dave. The police training is where the problem starts. Yeah, I agree.
See, I disagree there. I think
All
the
right.
problem starts where the congressmen make laws where you have to choke people for selling cigarettes.
We've got an awesome question here. Brad, why did you choose criminal law?
I don't know that there's a single reason, but I'd say one of the biggest reason would be that when it comes to being an attorney, if you want to do trials, if you want to be in the courtroom, criminal law is really the only option. Civil trials don't really happen anymore. Occasionally, on very rare circumstances, you'll get a civil trial. But, I know civil attorneys that have been civil attorneys for 20 plus years and have maybe done one trial.
Those
in
are
that entire
done.
time.
Those are done sitting across from a table yelling at each
It's
other.
all about negotiation. It's
Yeah.
all about the game of litigation and discovery.
But you want to
and
be
then
in the
settling.
combat.
But yeah, if you want to be in the courtroom and actually advocating for a client in front of a jury, it's going to be on the criminal side.
And I'm glad you did it. I think it's awesome. It was awesome to see you, one day they tell me, oh, he's going to law school. Great. The next day you're on the paper standing up for the previous AG. And I'm telling you, I was like, I didn't know he graduated. He hasn't. And you're there in the paper, in the courtroom fighting. And that's very impressive.
Yeah.
See, you're a real go-getter, Brad.
Yeah. What if there is not good? Is there not any part where you get punished for being bad? We just glorify the ugly. I'm confused by the question. I would think our court system, you could deal with crimes are a lot about desire and motivation, and then also neglect for another person's well-being. I guess that it's just off my head. I don't think I doubt you would find a criminal that is completely evil.
Yeah. I mean,
You would find moments of them with their desire.
my job has brought me into contact with some people who I might not say were completely evil, but that I would have been very scared to have been in a room alone with them, and who were as close to completely evil as I think you could possibly be.
And then they probably still pet a puppy.
Yeah.
Or,
But that is a very, very rare exception. And almost everybody I'm in contact with and I represent in my job is somebody who I'm there because they had the worst day of their life. They had one very bad day.
yeah.
And now they've been brought into the system.
Mhm.
And that's the majority of crime. It really is. It's people that have one very bad day.
Yeah.
And the exception is kind of the career criminal.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at George Floyd lived. He would have had to get a defense attorney, and he would have had to say why he had those narcotics, why he had that. Now, the counterfeit bill, I believe that's just a misdemeanor federally now. I believe that's what it
No
is.
way. Seriously?
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
I'm not specifically
believe
sure. We could look it up, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that
Yeah, I
it's
believe
simple
it's just
possessing it or whatever.
a misdemeanor. And that's also, they also have to go through the point to prove that he,
Yeah, that he knew that
He
didn't
knew,
get it exchanged
and
from somewhere else.
if he got it exchanged, which, how do you prove
How
that?
do you know? Yeah.
You know, but yeah, what I heard, and I didn't really dig into it deep, but it's just a misdemeanor. But the drug possession, that carries a little more weight. Now, maybe that was the, he pops it in his mouth and takes a chance, and that's a horrible thing, because I do believe, regardless of what you feel about the knee on the neck and all that, the drugs played a part in what happened to him. Drugs played a huge part. Methamphetamine and fentanyl both have tremendous pressures on the heart, on the pulmonary system, all of that. So,
Well, and I think just on the judgment system too.
oh yeah,
Right? If you're completely sober, do you make the decision to fight with the police like that? Probably
Yeah.
not, I would think. I mean, you don't know, but
Well, this guy had all the cards stacked against him. A bad heart condition. He had
He had clogged veins. He had
supposedly had COVID.
COVID like the week. Yeah, there's a whole bunch, but that's us picking it apart from thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
I hope there's not just ugly out there. And then she says, I think this might be the first attorney she's ever liked.
well, and I'm surprised at how often I have people say that when they
That's
come
good.
and
Well,
hire me, because I'm
You've always
I'm the first attorney they've ever really known.
You've always
So-
been extremely affable.
so.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. Now, I don't think Brad would want to give out any legal advice here, but go ahead and plug your business for anyone who may need your services.
Yeah, I mean, my office is in downtown Salt Lake. I'm right by the courthouse. I've got a website. If you Google me, I'll come up. And I'd be more than happy to talk
What's
to
your website,
anybody.
Brad?
It's bradandersonlegal.com.
Right here?
There. Yep, right
All
there.
right. We're going to go ahead and pull it up and we'll flash it on the screen.
So, and just to end kind of the George Floyd thing a little bit too, at the end of the day, look, law enforcement may be completely wrong. They may be violating every right you have. But if you cooperate, if you go along, the answer at the end of the day is then come hire somebody like me and get the problem fixed. It's not to fight.
Yeah.
You can't win fighting
You
the police.
can't win. And
Well, yeah, you don't win against someone who has radios,
right.
has
Armored vehicles.
army of, at least even in a small town, multiple people that show up armed with radios. Try to fight it in the courts. Try to get a good attorney that's going to make it so you don't spend as much time in jail prior to fighting it.
Yeah.
And by all means, 10 and 2, respond to them respectfully, disarm them with your voice. That's one big thing. Yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I apologize. I didn't know. Eat the ticket then, whatever. Eat it then. Do not try to fight them.
Don't do drugs.
Yeah, because for you to win, you have to cross a lot of lines. And you don't want to cross those lines because it just gets uglier.
Yeah.
Let me throw out some addresses for Brad. It's 43 East, 400 South, Suite A, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84111. The number is 435-830-4870. If you need legal advice on something that you're involved in, give him a call. He's a squared away guy, very affable, very nice guy, and he knows his stuff. But yeah, by all means,
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
get an
Brad.
attorney.
Hey, you're welcome, guys.
This is
Thank
great.
you
Yeah.
for having me.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And we will see you guys Thursday. We're talking to Board of Education lady, right?
Natalie Klein
Yeah.
from the State Board of Education.
Yeah. All right. So she's going to come on, and so we'll see you on Thursday. If you got any questions for that, shoot them to us on the website or on the Facebook or wherever you find out to find us.